budget's giveaways to the rich at the expense of the poor and the disabled. That is despicable. It's against the British sense of fair play, but it's entirely in line with a government that is pushing more people into poverty than blaming and punishing them for it. Now, others have spoken movingly in this debate about that, and I'd like to focus my comments on what this budget says about the government's commitment to devolution. The fact is, their actions don't match their rhetoric. The Secretary of State who introduced the Cities and Local Government Devolution Bill introduced at the same time the Housing Bill, which contains over 30 new centralising measures. This budget contains more of that same centralising instinct. Yesterday, the government centralised control of every school in the country. They've learned nothing from the Trojan horse scandal in Birmingham, and they're now stripping away local accountability from every school. There is simply no way the Department for Education can provide proper oversight of 24,000 schools from Whitehall. And a lack of oversight means problems won't be noticed or tackled until they've grown into crises. It's not devolution to hand schools over to giant national academy chains, and it's not localist to do that in the teeth of opposition from parents, teachers and communities. I do not understand how the Secretary of State can come here and lecture the House on the need to listen to parents when she won't listen to parents over forced academisation. I'll give way.
For giving way. And what does he make of Conservative Peter Edgar, the Executive Member for Education at Hampshire County Council, who said, and he's a former teacher, that the scheme could result in Britain's education system imploding, and urged the government to think again, and said, I'm horrified to think that the County Council's role in education is going to be destroyed by George Osborne in his budget. We've worked with the government to deliver the reforms and have been congratulated.
He's setting off. Steve Reid.
It's sad that the council has felt forced to say that, but he's absolutely right, of course. And there's little evidence of devolution over how local services will be funded in future as a result of this budget. Yesterday, as the IFS have now confirmed, the Chancellor tightened his fingers around the neck of local government funding, where he's handed limited powers over to city regions and others. He's refused to link those powers to resources. Now, I want to see this government go much further on devolution, more local control over schools, over housing, over health, over the work programme, but we need real fiscal devolution as well. If the government hands over services but then cuts the funding centrally, all they're really doing is devolving the blame for cuts made in Downing Street. Now, yesterday's budget graphically underscored that point. The Chancellor made much of his plans to allow 100% retention of business rates, and of course that sounds good, but he won't be clear about which services they will have to pay for. And at the same time, he is entirely scrapping the central government grant, which will leave councils far worse off and less able to fund the services that local people rely on. He won't explain either what mechanism, if any, will be in place to ensure that business rate retention doesn't just benefit areas that are already wealthy and penalise those areas that are not. There needs to be a fair funding mechanism in place that supports areas to expand their capacity for economic growth. Otherwise, they are locked into a downward spiral with no way out. Now, of course, we shouldn't be surprised that this budget didn't include anything about fair funding. Under this government, the 10 poorest councils have suffered cuts 23 times bigger than the 10 richest. Last month, the government voted to cut Croydon by another £44 million, but handed a £23 million windfall to far wealthier Surrey next door. Unfairness is the defining feature of this government. Now, what these further cuts mean for the vast majority of communities in this country is the closure of libraries, museums, youth services and children's centres. They will leave streets unswept and they will see street lights turned off at night. They will mean home care taken away from frail older people and disabled people left to struggle alone. They will mean early intervention in troubled families will be cut. Social workers won't be there to protect children from the impact of domestic violence. Services won't be there anymore to protect children at risk of abuse. We're simply storing up problems for the future while watching young lives get ripped apart. This Chancellor has got so much wrong. He's had to downgrade growth forecasts he made only 4 months ago. He missed his own deadline for paying down a deficit caused by the banking crash. He's delayed the recovery by cutting big infrastructure projects early on in his tenure and is now struggling to make up for lost time. He's failed to tackle the economy's desperately low levels of productivity, and now the IFS has questioned his ability to meet yesterday's forecasts without more cuts or tax rises to fill a £55 billion financial black hole. They further say this budget will reduce wages, will lower living standards and lead to further austerity. Quite simply, this is a Chancellor who cannot be trusted and who is unable to trust. He gets the big decisions wrong and he's afraid to devolve decisions to others. Instead of reforming public services, this government is laying them waste. Instead of sharing the proceeds of growth more fairly, this government is presiding over growing inequality. Instead of handing decision-making to local communities, this government is centralising powers in their own hands. Instead of shaping a fairer Britain, the Chancellor has thrown a financial bung to his wealthy mates and thrown the rest of the country to the dogs.
Fiona Bruce. Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise to support the budget statement by the Chancellor, in particular for the support it gives to